What's going on, Chess YouTube? In today's video, Alireza shocks the entire chess world, including Hikaru Nakamura, by sacrificing the knight with the move knight takes f2. What the heck is Alireza doing here? Your guess is as good as mine, but whatever he's on, I want some of that. And this is the 2024 Speed Chess Championship semifinals featuring Hikaru versus Alireza. Okay, in the game, Hikaru opens 1d4, and immediately in this game, we have a Nimzo Indian with the moves knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, threatening the move e4, and of course, black pins the knight with the move bishop b4, stopping e4 once and for all. Now from here, Hikaru goes for the classical variation with the move queen to c2, then castles a3, bishop takes, and then the move d5 from Alireza. The idea behind this move, of course, is to stop an e4 idea from white and to put pressure on that pawn on the c4 square. Now Hikaru goes bishop g5, trying to get the bishop outside the pawn chain before going e3 potentially. And here on move 7, things already get interesting. Alireza responds h6, trying to put the question to the bishop, where do you want to go? Now typically here, white is going to take that knight on the f6 square. However, instead, here Hikaru goes for the move bishop to h4, trying to throw Alireza off guard in this game. Now from here, black plays the strongest idea, g5, then bishop g3, and here black has a choice. The main ideas are going to be c5 immediately, or the idea knight to e4 first and only then c5 after the queen is kicked off the c3 square. Now in the game, Alireza goes for the second option, knight to e4 first, of course forking both the queen and the bishop on the g3 square. Now the queen has to move. In the game, Hikaru retreats queen to c2, and then that c5 break from Alireza, of course, just counterattacking in the center. Now it's going to be very hard for white to maintain this pawn duo on the d4 and the c4 squares. Now here, white already has a very big problem to solve. What do you do about that knight on the e4 square, and how do you get your kingside pieces developed into the game? Now here, immediately, black's big idea is queen to a5 check. Here, there is no good way for white to block the attack, as the knight controls the c3 and the d2 squares. Going queen c3 or queen d2 is not an option. So for example, if white goes f3 trying to knock off the knight, black's just going to take on the g3 square, then go queen a5. Same thing after e3. Here, black simply goes queen to a5 immediately. So with that in mind, here Hikaru takes the pawn on the c5 square. The idea behind this is if black goes queen to a5, then you have the very strong counter b4 blocking off this diagonal, and beyond that, the pawn on the c5 square would also be defended. Now of course, Alireza is no dummy. Here he goes knight to c6, just bringing more and more pieces into the attack, and now Hikaru plays an unthinkable move. He goes b4, expanding on the queen side. However, the big problem with this move is it opens up this diagonal here, exposing the rook, and black's going to have queen to f6 ideas, trying to hit that rook on the a1 square with a gain of tempo, and that's going to spell disaster for white here. Now real fast, instead of b4, the most obvious move would have been simply long castles here, and if Hikaru did that, he'd have a nice advantage in this game with good attacking chances against the black king. But instead, of course, b4 played by Hikaru, and here Alireza Firouza, he immediately counterattacks on the queen side with the move a5, then b5 from Hikaru, and now that key move queen to f6, exposing that rook on the a1 square. Now of course, white has no time to take the knight on the c6 square, because then that rook on a1 simply falls immediately. With that in mind, Hikaru here, rook to d1 is the move, trying to get the rook off that a1 square. But then Alireza jumps in with the knight to the d4 square, knight to d4, and the problem here is that knight hits the queen on c2. Now of course, the queen is forced to move. In the game, Hikaru goes queen to d3, trying to defend, but then knight to f5, and just more and more threats are opening up from black. That knight, of course, attacking the bishop on the g3 square. But beyond that, as queen now has access to the c3 square in many lines. Now here Hikaru tries to develop his kingside. He goes knight to f3. It's a good idea, but Alireza is not slowing down. Here, knight f takes g3 is the move. Now for white, f takes g3 is suicide, so of course Hikaru takes back with the h-pawn. H takes g3, but then g4 from black just try to knock the knight off the very good f3 square. And it turns out this move here is incredibly strong for black. Now this is a critical position. What is white supposed to do to save the game here? Well, this move looks insane, but it turns out the only good fighting move for white is going to be rook to h4. The idea is after black takes the knight on f3, yes, you are sacrificing the knight. However, after e takes f3, suddenly here you have two pawns for the minor piece, and you have this giant blob of pawns on the king side. That pawn square for one side, and theoretically those pawns could march down the board and put pressure on the black king, and to top it all off, the bishop now has easy access to the e2 square if it needs it. So overall, this idea of rook to h4 allowing g takes f3 followed by e takes f3 would have been the idea for white, but instead Hikaru here goes for the move c takes d5. Now this move looks logical. Black is just hanging that pawn on the d5 square. Hikaru is a simple man. He sees a free pawn, he takes a free pawn. However, this idea immediately backfires for Hikaru in the game. Here after queen takes d5, of course Alireza is going to go rook to e8, lining up the rook with the king, and now there are all sorts of threats against the king. White is going to have to be incredibly careful here. Now here Hikaru in the game, he does go rook to h4. This was that idea we saw just one move earlier. However, here it is a big mistake once again. Instead of this, the best idea for Hikaru as white was queen d4, trying to offer that trade up the queens on the d4 square. However, that is not what happened. Here Hikaru goes rook to h4, and this is where that knight sacrifice comes in. Here black gives the check to the king. This obviously forces knight d2 from white, so knight d2 on the board. And here Alireza Firouza throws in the immortal knight sacrifice. Knight takes f2. Yes, that is the move from the intro and the thumbnail of this video. Here we go. The idea behind this move, obviously. Well, you know what? Puzzle time. Try and figure out black's idea behind this move. This one's pretty simple, so even if you're only a beginner rated around 600, 800, 1000, you have a pretty good shot at solving this problem. Now, the idea, of course, is if white takes the knight, black has a mate in 2. You go queen to e3 check, forcing king e1 from white, but then queen takes g3. Believe it or not, this is checkmate on the spot. White has no way to cover this diagonal, and his king is trapped on the e1 square. Now going back, of course, Hikaru, being the blitz genius that he is, he spots this. Instead of going king takes f2 in this position, here he goes rook to b1, trying to give the king an escape route. Now this looks passive, but it is by far the best move for white. Now black simply takes that pawn on the g3 square, and now there are all sorts of discovered attacks with the knight and the queen. For example, knight d3 could be next with a double attack on the king. So Hikaru here, what does he do? Well, in the game, he goes queen to h5, potentially setting up threats against the black king if he can capture on the h6 square. If white had 2 free moves here, of course, queen takes h6 and then queen to h8 would be checkmate. But of course, black has some moves here. In the game, he goes knight to e4, the other discovered attack with the queen checking the king. Now, of course, there is no way to block that attack. You have to go king d1. That is literally the only legal move here. And now the rook, it transfers over to the d8 square, did its job on e8, and now it goes rook to d8, once again lining up with the king on the d1 square and pinning the knight on d2. Now, of course, here the threat, if white simply wastes a move, is going to be rook takes d2 check. That's going to be a disaster, so of course white has to do something about it. Here in the game, white defends with the move rook to b2, defending the knight with the rook. Very solid idea, but black is not slowing down. Queen to e3 is the move, and now of course there are 3 pieces attacking that knight on the d2 square, but only 2 pieces defending the rook and the king, so white once again has to do something here. Now in the game, Hikaru finds by far the best move, both a defensive move and an offensive move. Queen takes h6. Now get a load of this. This queen once again threatening checkmate on h8. If the queen gets there, that's game over. But beyond that, the queen indirectly defending the d2 square. So very impressive defensive / offensive resource from Hikaru. Now Alireza Firouza, knight to f2, once again hitting the king. The king is forced to go to the c1 square, but that means the queen can jump into c3, and that is what happens. Queen c3, king b1, and Alireza Firouza does not slow down. Bishop to f5, bringing in yet another attacking piece, hitting the king. Now Hikaru, he does his best to defend. e4 is the move, and now black, as long as he takes on the e4 square, he's going to be winning, because of course the queen on the c3 square does cover the h8 square. That is so critical. It means black's king right now is not in danger of getting checkmated, and of course the bishop on f5 also covering h7. So now here Alireza simply takes the pawn on the e4 square. Knight takes e4 is the move. Knight takes e4 is the move. He messed messed it up. Here, knight takes e4 was the move. That basically wins for black. Their discovered attacks with the bishop, but now instead we have the move bishop g6. And here suddenly black's advantage is pretty much wiped off the board. Now Hikaru, bishop c4, the bishop's into the game, setting up threats against the black king on this diagonal. And now Alireza is actually in time trouble. He goes rook to d6, setting up discovered attacks against the queen. And of course, the idea of white wastes a move is the idea of bishop takes e4 check. Then he's going to win the queen, and that's going to be game over. However, instead, here Hikaru, he spots this, and he simply takes the rook on the d6 square. And here, Alireza Firouza runs out of time. Yes, that's right. His clock hits 0. Hikaru still has about 18 seconds left on the clock, and that means Hikaru wins by time. Wow, what a game. Alireza Firouza with the unbelievable knight sacrifice, but Hikaru in the end was able to defend, and he pulled out a victory out of his you-know-what in this game.